So what we have here is a slightly more complex project. We have a main still, and this is in com.mantizo. We have quote, which is in com.pluralsight, and quote is going to be an implementation class. And then we have an interface called iQuote, and iQuote is also in com.pluralsight. So on iQuote, we're going to add a string method called getQuote. And then we'll implement this inside the quote class. So inside quote, we'll provide an implementation of iQuote, and then we'll let IntelliJ implement the method from us, and from here we'll just return a famous quote, something like "a rolling stone gathers no moss." So we don't want main, iQuote, and quote all on the class path, as if we did that, then we're back to the original demo in the previous module where we load everything from a single class path, and we're trying to load things using different class loaders here. So we need to split the applications into three parts. So main will be compiled to a .class file, and we load that from the application class path. The interfaces will be compiled to a jar file, and we load that from the application class path. But the implementation we load from a separate class path. We'll use our URL class loader for that. So to do that, IDEA lets us build what are known as artifacts. So if I do a build artifacts here and say all artifacts, and we'll do a rebuild. So what we end up with is an artifacts folder that contains an implementations jar and also contains an interfaces jar. And we can load those separately. We can load one on the class path, and we can load one using our own class loader. We also have production client com.mantizo main.class. So that will also be on the application class path. So how do we use this? So in main, we'll have code like before. We'll need to add a try-catch block. So the initial code is similar to the previous code, but in this case, we're adding a reference to our implementations jar file. So just to give us a little more space here, this jar file is in my demos folder, and there's a project folder, and then out artifacts, implementations_jar, implementations.jar. So we create that as the URL. We create our new URL class loader, and then we load up, in this case, com.pluralsight.quote. Once we have that in place, again, we can call class.newInstance, but now I can define this as being something of type iQuote, and we'll call this quote, and we'll need to add a cast to this. And this is all fine because iQuote will be in a jar file that will be on our class path, on the application class path. And then once I have that, we can then do system out again and print out quote.getQuote and just print out that message. So if we make the project and we build the artifacts, I'll do a rebuild just to be on the safe side. We can now run this from the command line with the correct class path, and we should find that we actually get the quote printed. So when we run the application, we have to ensure we have the right class path. So we do java -cp, and it's going to be an out/production/client will be one of the class paths, and then out/artifacts/interfaces_jar/interfaces.jar. So that's just the interfaces jar file. We don't have the implementations jar file on the class path. And then I can do com.mantizo.main, and we get the result. We get the quote printed out. And this is typically how we do class loading. We need something on the class path that we can use, and that's going to be our interface definitions, and then we load an implementation from a specific location to make use of that. So in the previous code, we saw that we could just use a reference to an object. We can't actually make use of any of the methods on the quote class that we loaded. And this is a general problem when using our own class loaders. So if we're using our own class loader, we can't reference the implementation classes in the code. As if we do, that will cause a class to be loaded with the application class loader, and that will then defeat the purpose of using our own class loader. So typically, the way we avoid this problem is to split our code into an implementation class and an interface. The interface definitions go onto the class path, and the implementation is loaded by our class loader. So as well as loading classes from a file URL, we can load it from any URL. So I'm going to copy this line of code, and comment this out so it stays in the demo, and then change this file URL to point at a web server I have running on this machine. We have Tomcat running on port 8080. So if I go to my browser and just go to localhost 8080, we'll see we have an instance of Tomcat, and I can use that inside my code. So back in the application, if I change the URL to http://localhost 8080 and specify the name of the jar file. So I need to place that jar file at the root of the server. So this is my server root. So it's in home Kevin J Dev Tomcat web apps root. If I go back to the application and build it and then run it again, then it fails. It can't find the quote class. So I need to take that artifact, which was in the artifact output directory, and load that into the Tomcat folder. And that's now here. So implementations.jar. So if I go back to my command prompt and run the code again, that code now works. So now the jar file is being loaded from an HTTP URL. So we can see we can actually load these class files across the network.